Hey, this is StarCraft 2 History, and this one covers a very small segment of time. It covers the GSL Season 2 season, it covers IPL 4, and it covers the finals of the first GSTL finals, Season 1, which is played at IPL Season 4 in Las Vegas. So let's get to it. Basically, at this time, there is, you could almost say, a wave of Protoss thought going across StarCraft 2. It wasn't that the balance was bad, was particularly great for Protoss players. It was that all of a sudden, a lot of the Protoss players that had been building up towards this time, they had become good enough and their thoughts and their concepts had come into being all at the same time. So you had Naniwa, of course, who had been building up through all of 2011, and he'd actually move over to Korea for a while to play in the GSL and was actually very successful for a foreigner. Actually, the last foreigner since Scarlet to make the round of 8 GSL, if you're paying attention to modern events. Then there was Parting, by far the best micro player we've ever seen in the game. Arguably, maybe Maru's the only one that's comparable. You have Liquid Hero, and I did an entire section with Hero with Gemini and Ollie, but basically this was a guy who believed a lot in the aggressive multitasking late game, and he created a very thin defense and was the first guy to really think about Warp Prisms, the first guy to really think about using the Phoenix, and the first guy to really think about using multi-pronged harass. And back to Parting, he was also the guy who was using like the storms. Then there was Yonghua briefly in the team tournaments. He was bringing out shit like the 3-gate Blinkstalker against the 4-gate, which had been like a revolutionary sort of thing in the PvP era, because it kind of gave an answer to a 4-gate, a very hard answer in that it was very hard to execute, and the 4-gate could still win and often did still win. There was Oz, who was a strange Protoss. He had some good points, he had some bad points. He was very good at PvP in particular, though. You had Squirtle, who had built up a bunch of builds all of a sudden, and he's generally credited by both Naniwa and Parting as being a very smart player. Parting, in particular, in the later years after Squirtle fell off, he actually still believed Squirtle could be one of the best players in the world, even though they were on different teams and there might have been some bad blood with how Parting left Stardale, but it never really happened for Squirtle. And one of the big reasons it's going to happen in this GSL finals when we eventually get there. But to explain Squirtle, there's this brilliant season. It's the season after. He's stuck in a GSL group with 3 Terrans, and what he does is he uses a basic build, like a robo into gateway after an expand, but each time he opens this way and the Terran scouts him, he'd pull out a different variant of what he'd do afterwards. So for instance, in one version he'd do a Blinkstalker all in with the Observer. In another version he'd do a Warp Prism harass into like an all in, or maybe a Warp Prism harass into a macro game. And then a third version it'd just be a straight up Immortal Gateway bust. It was very hard for the Terran player to read at the time, and it showed like how Squirtle's mind thought of the game, in a sense where he was an incredibly smart player. He had his own builds, and he had a lot of he was, among all of the Protoss players, he was arguably at the cutting edge of this wave, and he was, in my opinion, the best of all of them. Better than Hero, better than Parting, better than Naniwa, better than Huck or MC, who are also still relevant at this time, still pretty good players. Just all of them came together at the exact same time for whatever reason. And so in the GSL, I'll go over the first guys he beats because it's important. He beats Leenock and he beats MMA. And by this point, both Leenock and MMA are still very good players. And Leenock was still world class. MMA was still not nearly the championship level he was, or he didn't have that quite quite that level of respect still by the time you get to April of 2012. But as you remember, he did end up winning the Iron Squid a month later, so he's still a very good player. Then in the round of 16, Squirtle beats Oz, and Oz, like I said, was a very good PvP player, and he beats Maru. And Maru is a guy I haven't mentioned yet, but he was going to be on the come up for the rest of Wings of Liberty, and one of the reasons he'd stay down for a while yet is because of the Broodlord Infestor era. But once you get into Heart of the Storm, that's when you see the real Maru. That's when you see, in my opinion, the best micro Terran player that has ever lived, will ever live. I think he's far better than any other comparable example. So that's Maru, and what really makes Squirtle's name is, like, obviously that's part of it. The other part was the GSTL that Startail played in, and there's something special about the GSTL Season 1 in that you could go, if you got to the finals, you could go to Las Vegas because IPL was going to host the finals there, so it was this big time thing. And so they go in the GSTL bracket, basically, Squirtle comes up big for them. In some of the matches, like against IM, he basically 4 kills. That team beats Happy, Horror, Ready, and Yoda. And you're thinking to yourself, you don't know any of those guys, and you're right. You didn't know any of those guys. This is actually an example of IM just throwing away their GSTL teammate success to try to build up a bunch of B-teamers. And among those guys, the only ones that were relevant was Yoda and then Seed, who actually got beat by Bomber in the first game. They lose to Prime in a very close fashion. Basically, Beyond takes out all of their best Protoss players because Beyond's a very good TVP player. And in like the double elimination, they're able to beat out NS Hosa, who, like I said, had some very fun players, but wasn't that great of a team outside of Jockji. And Startail beats MVP in the semifinals. In that one, Squirtle beats Dongwegu and Finale. Finale wasn't that great. Dongwegu was a very good scalp to take. Still one of the best Zergs. Like I said, he's one of the second generation champions alongside MMA. And now you've noticed at this point that basically he's killed 2 of the 3 champions that people have been building up for this small era. Basically, beat MMA, he beat Dongwegu, and then something funky happens in the GSTL finals, and it's something worth noting. Basically, in the 4th game of the GSTL finals, Parting and Marine King had this epic, amazing game, and Parting basically wins, because what Parting is about to do is Parting is on top of Marine King's production with a shitload of army, and basically that's checkmate. There's no way Marine King gets out of that, and I've seen this scenario a million times, but the power goes out, or Marine King drops from the game, and then he gets a regame, and this tilts Startail off the face of the fucking planet, basically. And so they replay the game, Party ends up losing the game, and then Marine King goes on to kill all the Startail players, but you can kind of tell that all of them are super tilted, all of them are kind of angry about what happened, and basically everybody on Startail is super pissed. And then famously, Gerard, that shithead, went out to say, you know what, if you think it was unfair, just say it and then I'll quit. And it turned out nobody was going to say it to his face, but I'll go ahead and say it. Marine King definitely lost that game. I could have beat Marine King in that game in those circumstances. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure Parting is like 1000x the player I will ever be in StarCraft 2. So I'll go ahead and say that was definitely a Parting win. And Gerard, as we now know in the future, is also match-fixing scum, in a sense. But don't let that color the GSTL finals. Basically, Prime wins. Marine King did actually a great job. He did nothing wrong. But Gerard is... And so this actually kind of colors the IPL 3 finals, IPL 3 playoffs in a sense, because this happens at the same time as that tournament. But beyond that, this was a special tournament in that it's probably the IPL 4 and IPL 5 are super epic in a sense. Go ahead and look them up. This is actually better if you look it up on Wikipedia, and then because this is what's happening in this one. There's pool play, and in each pool there are 5 players, and in each pool there are 2 open slots. And to get the 2 open slots, you have to get out of a 128-man double elimination bracket. That's not something that happens today because it's ridiculously expensive to run something as crazy as that. You just invite players, you invite players into a smaller bracket, open bracket maybe, but you wouldn't pull out that many players. So to get out of the open bracket was immense. And a bunch of players were able to do it, a bunch weren't. Parting and Gonzi got into Group A. JYP and Curious got into Group B. And I haven't mentioned Curious yet, but basically Curious was a guy who had won the Code A and was a bit hyped up in StarTale as the next, as a potential next up and coming Zerg. But he never lived up to that. But he'd be very good in a very strange way, in the sense that he's kind of the harbinger of Classic, the Protoss player. And that's a strange comparison to make because one's Zerg player, one's a Protoss player. But Curious was a guy who had used every single Zerg build in the history of the game throughout his career, basically. And he had such a plethora, a huge playbook. But in order to actually maximize that playbook, he'd have to be very specific about which build to use against which player. And Classic was kind of the ultimate version of that, in the sense that Curious couldn't execute all those builds, or didn't have all the tools necessary in order to make each of the play styles perfect. Whereas Classic almost did. Like, if you want, you can think about it this way. There's a few categories you can rate players, like micro, macro, strategy, tactics, build orders, decision making, scouting, build variation, stuff like this. Classic was probably like the 3rd or 2nd best in every single category at the peak of his career. That's why he's a very interesting case, because I think he kind of brings on a different kind of meta for the Protoss player. And this also comes after Rain, so Rain is an important part of all of this. But I'm sidetracking. Basically, that's kind of what Curious was. A lesser version of Classic, a Zerg player, very solid, very smart, had a wide variation of builds. And then you go to Group C, and then out in the open bracket from Group C comes out Squirtle and Creator. Now, I've already talked about Squirtle. Squirtle is a guy everybody's hyping up to be potentially the best Protoss player in the world. And Creator was another prime Protoss. He was actually a guy people thought was going to be a prodigy, another young prodigy, just like Life, just like Tasia, at the end of 2012, because that's what he was looking like, because he had this incredible Protoss style of this double forge build that was very refined, very to the T when it came to the details, and he had a very strong sense of defense, but he never lived up to that potential. Frankly, for whatever reason, the Mothership Core killed him. I'm not sure why it killed him. It might have just been because he didn't know how to use it, and against the speed medevacs, the pace of the game was just too fast for him. I'm not exactly sure why he died, but basically he actually blames online tournament, the TSL, for giving him too much hope or something weird, or making him believe he was too good, and so he never bothered to change after that or some bullshit. But he had ears to failure to learn. So basically, he had some Marine King in him, I guess. And then the final group, Group D, was Jokji, like I said, GSL champion at a time, still a very good player, but didn't necessarily have as good results. And Byun. And Byun was also a good player. He'd actually get one of his best results in this year, GSL semifinals very soon. But we'll talk about that later. And basically, you have this now this giant pool bracket, and then only 2 guys get out from each. Nesty and Alive get out from Group A. Marine King and Stefano get out of Group B. Polt and Squirtle out of Group C. Bomber and MMA out of Group D. And so the only ones, I think most of the people know most of the information about each of these players, but I'll point out a few things. First, for Nesty, this is probably one of his last great tournament runs. The last time you really see him as Nesty, this all-time great Zerg. For Alive, this is one of his best, actually his best tournament result ever, in my opinion. He wins the entire tournament, and this coincides with like a very high placing in the after his GSL Season 1 placing. And he actually has some very good games with Nesty, even though I think they're actually kind of outdated by this time because Nesty wasn't playing the Broodlord Fester style. Marine King, like I said, his era, second generation champion, had just won the GSTL, this was right before the GSTL finals maybe. It was like around, because it was like within days of each other. Stefano, this guy was going to be the harbinger of everything that was terrible was going to happen, but as a player himself, he was arguably a top 5 Zerg player almost throughout the entire period of 2012. It's just he didn't have that many chances to play against the Koreans, even though I say that he actually had a shitload of chances compared to the modern day. And I guess the reason he doesn't get as many results as you would hope for, because I think he's actually a very intelligent, very incredibly talented player, is that his style gets not figured out, but it gets spread around. So what ends up happening is Stefano's forced into more in ZVZs as time goes on, and ZVT, ZVP, that was his shit. ZVZ he was good at, but it wasn't his specialty like the other two. Polt is funny in that Broodlord and Fester made him stronger. And basically Polt, the way he plays out the game, the way he thinks about the game, this terrible moment in time actually forges Polt into a tactical genius. And he kind of rides that for the rest of his career as his mechanics get worse and worse as time goes on. Like, I don't know why, but nobody was willing to say it at the time, but I don't mind saying it now. In like 2013 and onwards, Polt didn't have better mechanics than most of the better foreigner players, maybe even the average foreigner player, but he was just smarter than all of them, and he was smarter than almost every Korean player that was playing at the time, and that's how he was getting his wins. And then for Bomber, this is one of his moments of glory, so to speak, and he actually doesn't get far, but basically he's another guy like Polt who did pretty decently in the Broodlord and Fester era, and this was a pretty good result for him. And then for MMA, obviously, good result considering that he was about to fall off very soon. So in the bracket itself, Nesty takes out Squirtle, and this is actually very funny because as far as I know, Nesty basically just used a bunch of Leadock builds to cheese out Squirtle. Fair play, worked out. And then Squirtle goes on a rampage. He beats Bomber. He beats Marine King. And this is like after the GSTL finals, so there's a bit of mental revenge maybe going on there, or maybe Marine King's still stuck in his own head about the GSTL. It's hard to say with Marine King, really. So he beats Bomber, one of the best PvT players, beats Marine King, another one of the best PvT players. He beats MMA, a very good Terran player, PvT not his best. He plays Nesty in the winners and the losers finals, defeats him, and then he plays Alive in the finals. And this is why this and the GSL are reasons as to why I don't actually consider Squirtle a Kong. And the reason I don't consider Squirtle a Kong is because look at this final between him and Alive. Look at the final between him and GSL and him and MVP, and there's actually no point where you can say he choked super hard or he kind of fell under the pressure or he didn't try to play his best. Actually, he did try to play his best because the Squirtle versus Alive finals was, let me check the date, but I'm pretty sure like almost all these games that I just said, yeah, Yes. So Squirtle versus SC round one, Squirtle versus Bomber, Squirtle versus Marine King, Squirtle versus MMA, Squirtle versus SC best of 5. That is 4 best of 3s and 1 best of 5 in one day. And Squirtle is going to play live again. So, and not only does Squirtle win the first best of 5, he has to win 2 best of 5s to win this entire thing. So he wins another best of 5. So at this point, he is going on to like 14 or 15 hours of just gameplay, just hard, in your face, going at it over and over and over again. And this is something that's completely forgotten when talking about Squirtle's result here. Like, people just assume, oh, he got second place because he gets second place a lot in his career from here on forwards. So they assume this one is like the other ones where he did crumble under pressure, where he did play like shit, where he wasn't nearly as good. No, this is the one where he actually fought to the bitter end, and it's actually completely understandable why he lost this. And he even won. He even reset the first round. It's an incredible. Overall, the playoff bracket is actually pretty fun to watch overall. And you know what? Fair play to Alive, because Alive, he didn't have to go through that much of like a marathon. He beat Polt, he beat Marine King, he beat ST, and then he played the finals. But for him, it was still a pretty decent marathon. And you're not going to see anything like that in the modern day, because guess what? Everybody understands you're not supposed to do that in a fucking tournament. You're not supposed to have like 5 best of 3s. 3 best of 3s and 3 best of 5s in a single day. That's too much for anybody. And Squirtle, he somehow managed to do it. And this is coming at the end of the entire marathon, because Squirtle had come out for the open bracket. And this is the point I'm trying to make, is the reason Las Vegas and the reason GSL make Squirtle's name is because he basically beats everybody. Think about all the names I've just listed. He beat Bomber, Marine King, MMA, Dongwegu at a point, Nesty, basically beat Alive at least once in one of the best of 5s. He beat Lenok, beat Oz, beat Maru, and then in the playoffs of the GSL itself, he also beats Tasia, beats Hero, Liquid Hero, that is. And so, basically at this point, everybody actually confirms and believes that Squirtle is the best Protoss player in the world, right? And so, he is the hardest single player, in my opinion. Obviously, in Ollie's opinion, and he believes Hero might have been a worse opponent for MVP. I'm not buying it just because of how much pressure and mental strength it takes to play a GSL finals. But in any case, Squirtle is definitely, at least, the best player at this time. The player that everybody looked up to as the best player of this very specific piece of time. And he makes it to the GSL finals. And his opponent couldn't be the more opposite of him, because MVP was fucking up. MVP was a guy who had basically been revealed that in 2012, and for some amount of time, not exactly sure about the timeline of this, but he had been suffering through injuries the entire time he had been playing, and you can kind of and in the first GSL season, I'll look it up real fast. He beats Lucky, and he beats Lucky twice to get out of GSL round of 32 in GSL season 1. And guess what? I don't think Lucky's a good player at all. I still think he was incredibly lucky to get to that IPL 3 finals to play Stefano. And then in the round of 16, he basically got smashed out by Gumiho and Gumiho twice, actually. He was able to beat Curious in the losers, but loses to Gumiho twice. And basically, it's not even just the results, though. It's just the way he was playing. It's like he was a much worse version of himself. Like, he didn't have the incredible execution, incredible mechanics of an innovation. So it was looking really sloppy. It was looking really bad. It was looking like he was out of date, and it looked like he had completely fallen off. And this was the correct assessment of MVP going into GSL Season 2. Because as it turned out, the injuries were like pinched nerves, so it made it painful for him to play. He couldn't feel his keyboard, couldn't feel his mouse. Any prolonged period of activity like I said, it hurts him. So it made it very hard for him to practice. And now we're going to go back to a video I did about, I forget what it's called, but basically there's 2 critical tournaments you have to look at at the very end of 2011. And these are the two tournaments where it felt like there was like a hidden quality. One was a hidden quality in MVP, and the other was a lesson for MVP. The lesson comes from MMA in the GSL October finals, where MMA defeats MVP in a pretty one-sided finals, where MVP was probably still healthy, definitely at the peak of his career in terms of form. And MMA basically counters MVP. And this kind of shocks MVP. Because MVP looks at the finals and he realizes MMA's builds were basically designed to defeat him. And MVP had never thought on that level because MVP had just used regular builds to defeat all of his opponents up to this point. And so this changes MVP. It's a critical loss for MVP, and MVP takes on this style of thinking throughout the rest of 2012 because like he can't use a standard shit anymore. He has to think really hard and a lot. And then the other series I didn't talk about last time was in GSL November, and this is an incredible series. It's one of the most underrated series in StarCraft 2 history. It's MVP versus Lenok in the semifinals, and this was after Lenok had won at MLG Anaheim, and people were, it was either before or after that, and basically people were claiming Lenok was the best player in the world. Pretty solid claim, to be honest. He had beaten everybody, but this is an incredible series by MVP, especially the second game on dual site. And this is what happens on the second game on dual site. Basically, Lenok gets this gigantic lead against MVP. And then MVP fights to the fucking bitter end in a way that you had never seen MVP be forced to fight to. You had never seen any Terran player forced to fight like this. Scrapping every single resource he could. Scrapping every single unit he could. Making sure he was constantly trying to find a way into the game. Constantly making moves to put Lenok off his guard, and basically Lenok has like double his supply the entire game, but Lenok, no matter how many times he attacks, MVP holds. No matter how long the game goes, MVP almost keeps making another push, another push, despite being way down on supply. That actually has an effect, and it ends, sadly, with the Infestor. But before Lenok pulls out the Infestor trump card, MVP, you should definitely watch that match because it's like one of the best almost comebacks anybody has ever seen in StarCraft 2 history. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it shows a hidden quality in MVP that we hadn't seen up until that point, and it was like this special kind of resilience, this special kind of never say die attitude. And these two pieces, MMA forcing him to learn how to think about the game, how to counter the player, not the race, and that kind of crazy resilience that we saw in that game against Lenok. These two things, and then his own like experiences, his own veteran savvy, all of that shit combined, and he's gonna make a miracle. He's gonna make multiple miracles actually, because that's who MVP is. So in that GSL season, in season 2, MVP barely scrapes by into the round of 8, and I mean just barely. I think he was actually on the verge of elimination twice. Basically, Ryung beats MVP in the first round because Ryung's a pretty good Terran. MVP was on the downslide. MVP barely survives beating Puzzle, and then he beats Ryung. And even though Puzzle had that 400 APM thing going, he wasn't actually a great Protoss. I don't care what anybody says about that. Ryung was pretty good, but he got outplayed basically. And then in Group B, MVP beats July, beats Lenok to get out. He actually loses to Hero in the winners match. And famously, like, MVP has never been that great in the group stages because he can't really prepare as well for individual players. And so you get into the playoffs, and the playoffs have him play against Naniwa. And for all intents and purposes, I believe Naniwa was probably the favorite of that matchup, at least a 50-50 at worst, because Naniwa was in some of the best form of his career at that point. He had been practicing in Korea, studying Protoss in Korea. He was part of that Protoss wave of thought, so to speak. And MVP was on the down low. MVP's form was probably some of the worst. It was actually some of the worst we'd ever seen by that point. And I think everybody rightly stated that, you know what, the only way MVP was going to win this was off of like some weird like boxer-esque experience, like veteran shit, and that's actually what MVP pulls here. Now I will say, believe Naniwa came out at some point and said he believes that Polt leaked some scrims to MVP. I don't know about the extent of that. I don't know if he like straight up said this is what Naniwa does at X time. This is what these are the builds, or he straight up gives him the VODs or replays or whatever. I will say that MVP basically has shown though throughout this game and then the rest of his career that he was a guy who could predict what the other guy was going to do, even in situations where it's very unlikely like a player would share that guy's replays to MVP, and MVP was an incredibly smart player, so who knows. So MVP, going back into it, he uses, from what I remember, a bio like tank Viking style against Naniwa, which kind of like breaks apart which kind of counters Naniwa's army. But the more important thing is MVP does is the 11-11 racks a bunch of times against Naniwa to counter a very greedy style from Naniwa. And so MVP wins that one. And it's like a shock. And I remember Naniwa basically going into the parking lot and screaming or something. That's kind of how it was like in some weird post-game interview where like he was so upset with what had happened, because Naniwa on a very deep level knows that he should have probably beat MVP there. And this is going to be the story of the rest of MVP's career. MVP should have lost. Everything was going against MVP. Somehow MVP won. That's actually going to be the rest of MVP's career. And and in the semifinals, he plays against Parting. And now Parting was a player who was in Startail also, just like Naniwa, was a straight up Startail player. Like I said, the best Protoss player. Actually, in my opinion, the best PvT player of the time. Better than Hero, better than Squirtle, arguably. And the way everybody thought this was going to go was even more one-sided. Like, okay, maybe Naniwa has a 50-50, but Parting, he's going to be like 70-30 at least. And the reason people thought this was because Parting was a PvT specialist. He had been fighting Marine King this entire time, going even with him, and Marine King was, in everybody's opinion, and correct opinion, the best TVP player. And so you go against MVP, against his worst matchup, against the best PvT player at the time, in a time where the meta was Protoss favored because there's so many different ways to play Protoss. All that shit was coming into play. And you have MVP, guy on his back, guy injured. And everybody was thinking, okay, good job, MVP. He somehow cheesed out Naniwa. Yes, somehow did it. But this is the end of the line. And Parting, in a famous pre-game interview, said, I'm probably going to win 3-0. There's no way MVP will have it. You know what? Actually, maybe it'll be 3-1 just because, you know, it's MVP. Maybe he'll win one somehow. As it turns out, it was 3-1, just not the way he predicted. MVP wins. And basically what happens is MVP, from what I remember, cheeses the shit out of him too. It's another amazing series. It's another amazing series in the sense that MVP like really shows that he's willing to do whatever the fuck it takes to win. And let's see. Let me try to remember. Let me try to look up the games real fast. Because from what I remember, it was like some crazy fucking shit went down. Okay, yeah. So basically, game one on Toon Valley. I remember this now. It's starting to come back. In Toon Valley, they both play a standard game on a Toon Valley, like 2-base, 2-base. Parting goes for the more safe Colossus style instead of his usual like High Templar style. And as the game goes on, because MVP, if you play the Colossus style into High Templars, you're basically running out of you basically lose map control in a sense. And so what MVP does, like, he basically just fights him, but he does something that Parting doesn't realize. It's like And nobody at this point in StarCraft 2 history has realized is what happens is, what if you pull your SCVs and attack with your main army? Because up to that point, in a clash versus clash between army versus army, Terran would usually just slightly lose out, and there are reasons for that. Usually, like the Protoss is better on micro. Depends on the terrain, because most Protoss players would realize you don't fight in open terrain, so in that case, the Protoss would win. But what if you pulled off all your SCVs and then attacked? And this is the situation that MVP ends up putting parting in and tilts him off the face of the planet. Basically, like, gets very confused because this is the first time we've ever seen the SCV pull against a Protoss player, and it completely surprises Parting. Parting loses the first game, and then in the second game, MVP realizes, or MVP already had this plan, but he goes for the 1-1-1 all in, and the 1-1-1 all in, like I said, it was starting to get figured out a little bit, and Parting himself was a very good anti-1-1-1 player, but because he pulls that out there, it kind of like shocks and like breaks Parting's mental game in a sense, and then Parting loses. So it's actually shocking what he did, but Parting pulls back for the third game. Let's see here. Like basically they play a macro game, and then Parting gets more into the groove, and Parting, obviously a better macro player, wins that out. And then the fourth game, I believe it's going to be, if I know my boy, like an 11-11 or some shit. No, it's like, all right, so it's the base trade game. I remember now. So basically, Metropolis, this gigantic map, MVP goes for Biomedevac, and then basically he just abuses Parting's like bad defensive style and kills him, basically, and that's how MVP gets in the GSL finals. So MVP beats Naniwa, MVP beats Parting, and now MVP plays against Squirtle. And you know what? It's actually a miracle. It's actually a semi-miracle he beat Naniwa. It is a miracle he beat Parting, and surely at this point, in everybody's minds, Squirtle was going to beat MVP, because Squirtle had just watched MVP play 2 best-of-5 against TVPs. He has all the information. He actually has both of those guys that MVP beat in his team house giving him information. He is the smartest Protoss by this point in StarCraft 2 history. He has just proven to everybody at IPL he can beat everybody. Like, he had beaten everybody. And MVP was lesser than all of the people he had beaten. Like Donggu, MMA, Marine King, Nesty, Alive, all these guys were considered better by this point than MVP in his current form. But it's MVP. And that's kind of the mantra that kind of goes on for the rest of MVP's career for at least 2012. And so this is actually a brilliant series in that MVP does something nobody will ever do again, and Squirtle is able to actually adapt on the fly to all the crazy shit that MVP is about to throw at him. But for now, I guess I'll set it up with this. MVP, if MVP was a player, basically, that, like I said, had at that point been known as, colloquially among the Koreans, as Sleepy Jung. And the reason he was known as Sleepy Jung was because all of his games were so boring, all of his games were so mechanical, all of his games were so dull. But this season changes it all around, because the news of his injuries gets out there, and then you actually see the way he plays. It's so desperate. It's so broken compared to what he once was. I can see, like, this guy is fighting on the edge of his rope. This guy is doing fucking everything he can to try to win these goddamn games. And it sets a chord within both the foreigner community and the Korean community, because MVP was never loved. Like, I have to emphasize this. MVP was never loved as a player. Like, nobody really likes greatness that much. At least not unless you're like a popular player, and MVP is definitely not a popular player at all. And so like as we watch this, it's starting to get into people's heads like maybe this is like maybe he's boxer. Like that's actually the analogy a lot of people are bringing up. Like is MVP boxer? Is like MVP the boxer of StarCraft 2 because he was pulling out these miracle wins, but in my opinion, he's actually better than boxer was at these miracle wins because of the way the meta is going to work out, because of how bad the how bad the matchups were going to be out for MVP, how much he had to innovate, how much he had to how like the personal injuries he's going to have to go through in order to make all this shit work. So it was just like an incredible like moment in time. And I remember actually that there's a State of the Game podcast at the time, and basically everybody correctly predicted that Squirtle should probably win this because I mean Squirtle was the best player. Then there was the GSL. There's like a GSL like pregame show where like they got all their like casters, all their experts, all their even the players, even some of the players, and everybody correctly predicted, like I said, Squirtle was gonna win. Like, good job MVP. You really did fucking great to get here. What a great storyline. But this is where it ends. This is where Squirtle gets that mantle of best player in the world with officially with that GSL fucking title. And so you go into the series, and this is, in my opinion, the best prepared series in StarCraft 2 history, just because of what you have to do on MVP side of the equation to win. Because like I said, when I pointed out all of these factors, micro, macro, build orders, build variants, tactics, strategy, mental control, like ability, composure, all this shit. The only thing MVP really has in his arsenal that is better than Squirtle in any of those categories is probably composure. And he can only match Squirtle in build variety. And at that point in time, MVP had never proven to anybody that he could actually create builds on the level of any of like the Protoss players that were coming out at that time, basically. And so when he goes into this matchup, he basically surprises Squirtle, because Squirtle this entire time he's going to expect an 11-11 from MVP, and he doesn't do it until the very end of the series. What he does instead is on Daybreak, on Entomb Valley, on Antigua, he goes for builds that more. He goes for more standard builds like in those ones, but he does it in a different way, in the sense that what he does is he counters Squirtle's map early game map movement and is able to get into base trade situations, take out Squirtle's economy, and because Terran has the mules, he's able to defeat Squirtle. And then Squirtle rallies back, and this is why I don't believe Squirtle was a Kong. At least by that point, he was not a choker. Cloud Kingdom, like he and MVP plays straight up game, he wins. Metropolis, they go to the end game with, that's the famous Mothership Core Vortex moment, and it's like a piece of knowledge that MVP doesn't know, so Squirtle ends up winning. Great game. And for MVP's part, he basically went for this maxed out battlecruiser army that nobody had ever seen before, and that was his idea of throwing Squirtle off. And Dual Sight was a super aggressive Terran Bio build from MVP to try to shake up Squirtle again. Squirtle shows his mental fortitude, shows why he was such an incredible player at the time, and Squirtle wins. And then you go to Game 7, and the reason everything up to that point had actually been building to Game 7, because MVP's 11-11 was his best build in a sense. It was the easiest build to cheese it Protoss against, but it only would work once against a Protoss player, and not even that often if they knew it was coming. And Squirtle should have known it was coming. And Squirtle actually did know it was coming, but what MVP did was he had built 6 games into the series before using it on the 7th game on a map where it's not actually that good for it. And he uses it there. Squirtle scouts it, and Squirtle's actually able to defend the first all-in. But this is where MVP's tenacity comes in, because he's able to use that map architecture. He's able to make a creative way of abusing, like I said, Squirtle's map movements with his early game units, specifically this time with the Stalker, because go ahead and look throughout the rest of every PvT before this game. The Squirtle map movement of the Stalker is actually the theoretical correct move based off of the knowledge they had at that time, and nobody had ever done what MVP was about to do and ambush that Stalker with Marines and rushing SCVs. And then MVP steals the fucking game. He steals the GSL, and he makes the first miracle. And MVP will go on to have 3 more miracles by the time his career is done. But that was his first. That was his most incredible, and he wins the GSL. Squirtle literally breaks after this GSL as well. Like, he won't watch this GSL finals for months. I don't even know if he has rewatched it ever. And like in the next GSL, he gets eliminated by King in like a group stage, or not eliminated but beaten by King by 2 11-11 racks, and he basically says he didn't prepare for those because he didn't want to rewatch what MVP had done to him. Months later, when Life actually does win the GSL trophy, like you see, there's like some weird image of like Squirtle kissing that trophy as if, oh, it should have been me. I should have had this. I should have been the one. But Squirtle was never the one after MVP broke him. And it's at that point that like MVP basically breaks Squirtle's career. But through doing so, he has won the GSL in an impossible state. Like, to give you odds, out of 100 games, MVP should have only won 4. But he won the right 4. That's in my opinion a good summation of the MVP versus Squirtle series, and that was the first miracle. See you guys later.